On the panel, we're pleased to have Paul McAvinchey from the Product Collective. Product Collective, for those who don't know, is behind the Industry Conference, another great product conference that we're part of, both in Cleveland, Ohio, and Ireland as well. So we're excited to be part of that team. We have Kirsten Butzow from Pragmatic Marketing, which we've been partners and collaborators with on webinars and other events for years now. Yeah. So we're great to have Kirsten here. We have Jake Sorofman, our Chief Marketing Officer at Pendo, and then we have Brian Crofts, our Chief Product Officer, and he's going to be moderating this panel. So I will let Brian take it away and ask great questions. So.
All right, thanks, Todd. Well, great. Well, we're all grateful to be here on the stage to have a good discussion, and so hopefully it provides. We're all grateful to be here on the stage to have a good discussion, and so hopefully it provides some good values, some good insights as we talk. So today, throughout the day and tomorrow, we'll be talking a lot about product love, about creating amazing experiences so that your customers will love your products. And so today on this panel, I'm gonna ask a few questions to really kind of unpack some of the new insights that we've discovered through some new primary research about the role of product management. And the big kind of takeaway is that as we're focusing on building better products, the role of the product management and the product leader is evolving. And so we want to open up into dialogue and talk about where it's evolving, some of the trends that we're seeing, some of the data that was collected, and to see if we can have a discussion, maybe even some debate, some disagreement to kind of liven it up a little bit, but we'll see where it goes. So my first question, and Kirsten, if I can start with you. This is about tactical execution versus kind of more forward-thinking product visionary type stuff. And what the pragmatic marketing study showed is more of an 80-20 split. So 80% of product managers' time focused on tactical, and about 20% focused on more of the strategic. And so the question is this healthy? Are PMs too bogged down on execution?
I don't know. At first blush, by the way, I think it's a little scary that y'all had to get beers to listen to us, but I don't know if that's helpful or hurtful. We had this conversation before coming here today, so the three of us spent some time on the phone actually. And at first blush, you might look at that and you might say an 80-20 split of tactical versus strategic doesn't necessarily sound very healthy. It sounds like maybe we're not being strategic in our roles. But then I thought, maybe. And the reason that I say maybe is I'm not necessarily bothered by the percentage split of tactical versus strategic. If the tactical work that we're doing isn't in support of a strategic initiative or a strategic vision, then I have probably big exception. Yeah. Because what that gives is an indication that we're just running around and we're very, very busy and we're going to meetings and we're returning emails. But if it's not in support of some sort of overarching strategic direction that gives us a real clarity of who we're trying to delight and what we're trying to build when we go out there to delight them, then it's probably just work for the sake of work. And so I think the real question starts to become less about what that strategic versus tactical split is, than how much of that work is being done in support of a strategic vision or just work that's being done because work's being done.
So one could say if I have a really clear vision, it's all about execution, 100%.
Sure, it would be okay to have a little bit of a different mix, right?
Makes a lot of sense.
If you have no vision and you're running around, I was going to say like a chicken with your head cut off, but I don't want to. No chickens were hurt, and so
it's okay. We kill chickens here.
Okay, that's not good. I feel like we should move on to somebody else on the panel now.
Did the question broach how much a product manager wanted to be tactical versus strategic? Because I'm sure that most of us here enjoy the strategic part of it, and it's probably what brought us into the role. Yeah. Whether you're coming from a startup thing or you're an engineer, or you wanted kind of more of a breadth. But I think, from my understanding and from my experience, I've seen product managers that are stuck in the tactical role, and to get them to our conference, for example, is a difficult thing because we want our product manager back in the office building things.
Yeah.
and it's hard to get out of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that we asked a very similar question in State of Product Leadership around, so how do you see your role and what does your company hire for? And what do you see as the future of product management? And it all aligned to more of a tactical orientation, which I think is pretty interesting. I guess I'd say that obviously both matter, and they don't necessarily have to be occupied in the same human. It's about ensuring that you have that DNA in your product team, and people that are playing different roles. Mike is a little wonky here.
Well, we just don't care.
Yeah.
It's feedback. Is
You
what
can
it is.
use my mic if you want.
Yeah, because theirs work fine. It's really
How's
good.
this? How's this?
Great.
Like Brian, for example, spends more of his time thinking about the strategic vision for Pendo, of course. You wouldn't want him focused on the tactical. That's not to say that his team isn't focused on getting a lot of stuff done.
Yeah, if you ask the same question, like how strategic do you want your PMs to be?
Yeah.
Or do you want them to be just executing on the strategy that you've given?
Well, yeah. So on my team, for example, the most important thing for me is that they understand the why behind what they're building, right? And so you could say that's very strategic or not, but at the end of the day, whether it's the product manager, the designer, or the engineer team, they need to understand the why. Now, to understand the why, you have to understand your customer, you have to understand the pain that you're solving, and so from that aspect, it's strategic. But at the end of the day, they don't have the time to sit there and pontificate and think and strategize because there's a lot of execution. But it does free me up to start to think about that and spend more time with customers and look at the kind of the horizon and the job to be done. So.
Yeah, I wonder if there's actually part of this is an artifact of the fact that strategy comes out of execution. You know, if you're iterating and you're thinking about continuous innovation and more of an iterative faction, you're using these experiments to learn about what you ought to be doing. So maybe it's becoming more tactical in a way that serves your strategic goals.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's jump to another question, which is really about where the growth or the career cycle of product management. So Paul, let's talk about this. In the State of Product Leadership, the study found that the average product team leaders have 6 to 10 years of experience. What does the career path for product managers look like today? I mean, where do they come from? Where do they start? How do they grow within the profession? And is it changing?
Well, I keep on meeting a person in this situation. Maybe I could get a show of hands. Hands up here has felt like they've been parachuted into the role of product management, and then people have pointed at you and said, you're the product manager. So I think it's, you know, a career progression into product management is a pretty nascent idea. There are courses, in conferences and that kind of business to get you into it, but it's largely going to be by surprise. I know, Kirsten, you've got some good thoughts on how you might grow horizontally as a product manager in a company, but it seems like you have a choice whether to continue managing a product as a product manager and working your way up to, say, director of product. But as soon as you go into a higher level product leadership role, you're essentially managing people. I've heard some people describe that as having your people as a product. But it's certainly, I've got more questions than answers on how a product manager's career progresses.
Yeah, actually, let's do another quick survey. Who started their career in product management? Who started? Okay, great. How many people came?
2.
So 2 or 3. How many people came from engineering? A little bit more. What about like finance? Okay, so yeah, you can see it's all over the place. Interesting. Cool. So Jake, I have a question for you. So we were talking earlier about, well, in the survey, and this is something that we see a lot, is that in the survey it talked about 34%, the product manager said 34% of the features that they launched ended up never being used. Right? And so that's hard for me to process, right? Because we live in the era of information, right? We have data, we have insights where we know that we should be going out and working with our customers. So how is it that people and product teams are still launching stuff that people aren't using?
I think there's a few things going on here. One is a lot of companies are still letting their competitors define the rules. And they end up making product decisions on the basis of what's conventionally expected or accepted rather than really unpacking the customer need state. So asking the hard questions that help you understand the why behind the requirements. And that's where true innovation and true product solution match actually happen, is by really understanding the deeper customer need that's behind the articulated requirement. The articulated requirement often comes from what's conventionally expected within a product category. So I think part of it is just, it's almost like inertia. We're following a almost hidebound or stale set of rules around how we make product decisions.
I actually think, I was shocked, it's not higher than 34%.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to the thread that both of you have mentioned here, and I think it was, Brian, something that you said at the very start when you said, for me, it's understanding the why. I want my teams to understand the why. And as you were talking about that, I thought, understanding the why is great. Understanding the why as it relates to building for groups or segments full of customers versus one customer at a time is an important difference of why to understand. And I think it's not uncommon for us to hear one thing in the marketplace. Maybe a big customer has a specific request. Maybe we hear a competitor doing something, so we chase that. Maybe we have a really big sales opportunity if we had some key piece of functionality. And so we have so we think we have the why. And so we have this tendency to want to go build solutions based on those individual data points of why, but sometimes we fail to kind of press pause and ask ourselves, but is that really working towards the greater good of the vision of where we're trying to head? Yeah. And so when I think about thinking about the why, I want to get all those data points, but I also want to correlate that to the greater why, because if we don't make that correlation, very often we end up with these one-off things where we end up with feature functionality that 34% of the user community aren't using because it was built for one person at a time. Yeah. And so I think that it's, it's things like, let's be strategic. Who wants to be strategic? Everybody wants to be strategic. What does that mean? Oh no, that's where it gets hard. Let's understand the why. What does that mean? Oh, well, that's where it gets hard, right? And so, especially when you think about the show of hands of the different paths that people come into product management, everybody has a tendency to bring their perspective. So if you came from a support role, if you came a sales role, if you came from an engineering role, you have a tendency to want to bring that individual perspective to the conversation as well. So I think we have to kind of take those blinders off, and so we can think about the big umbrella why, and that hopefully should lead to a reduction of that type of statistic.
But you're convinced there always will be some percentage.
100%, because we're not clairvoyant. I mean, we don't have a crystal ball.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this might be tied into the fact that we've all been just parachuted into the roles and we're like, what are we doing? But I think a lot of us will feel in our gut that we're just doing our jobs poorly. And so we read about things, we watch the videos, we go to conferences, and we learn that we have to talk to 500 customers. We learn that we have to make very specific hypotheses that can be validated, proved false or true. We have to iterate back, and we have to do all these techniques to create features that our customers love and want. But there's so many shortcuts that you can take in those frameworks and methods. So I personally know that I think I'm doing a jobs to be done interview, but it's just a friendly conversation I'm having with somebody, and I'll come out and say, oh, I've got all these insights, and then I'll update the website after having spoken to one person.
Yeah.
So I think it's largely to do with the fact that we all need to be educated more.
Yeah, got it. Now, Jake, you were touching on something about sometimes if we focus maybe more on the competition, it becomes about getting to feature parity, and then all of a sudden you're building stuff that, again, maybe our users don't want. And so would love maybe a panel discussion on, and again, kind of channeling like a Bezos, right, who's like, don't look at your competition, focus on the customer. But yet we still do a lot of market research and a lot of competitive analysis on competitive products. So what's the approach there? What's the, do we look at competition or do we just focus on the customer?
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know how deep I can go in on that question, but I do know that it's a fool's errand to try and copy your competitors, and to consider your competitor so smart, and that the fact that they've done all that work I was talking earlier on, so they must have it right. Yeah. So we need to build what they have. It can only lead to a shit show of a product.
Yeah. What I would say is that it's a lot easier to be differentiated than different. And because of that, there is a tendency to focus on incremental differentiation relative to a known competitor and focus on how a category is perceived and the sort of the buying criteria for a category. But that, in the long run, that isn't going to return the same results as someone who has the, you know, the boldness and the courage to be fundamentally different. And that's the longer game, but it pays dividends over time. I just think that there's a natural tendency to focus on differentiation within a category defined by someone else.
Yeah, got it.
And I'll just encourage, this is half a plug, but I'll encourage people to Google Jason Fried at Industry last year. We had him speak. And so we were talking about the nature of ideas and the fact that many people go and they copy the great marketing stuff that they do. And I'll paraphrase, but he was basically saying that the messaging and the product that they create is very, very specific to specific jobs that their customers are getting done. And so the marketing message seems like a very generalized marketing message. I'm talking marketing here, but it could be product. But it's so specific to theirs. And so if you apply it to yours, yeah, it kind of makes it look professional and good, but it's not getting to the heart of the job that your product or your customer needs to get done.
Okay, so then so the other side of this, how do we pay attention or how do we get inspired by our competition? Because you said both, yes.
Yeah, well, it goes back to where we started this conversation with clarity of understanding of your strategy. And I mean, I really feel like your strategy can be boiled down very, very simplistically to who you're trying to delight and what you're trying to build to delight them. And if you use that to inform the target that frames the discussion, when something comes in from your competition that doesn't apply to who you're trying to delight, I'm going to keep it on my radar, but I'm not going to chase after it for the sake of chasing after it. Because there's many curious things about our roles. And one of the very curious things to me is this tendency we have to extend a level of genius to our competitors that they don't necessarily deserve. In other words, we don't start from a place when we evaluate the competition and say, maybe they don't know what they're doing. Or maybe they're going after a completely different market than us. Instead, we hear about a competitive threat and we spin up, right? We start spinning, we put the hamsters on the wheels and we start getting it going. And we never stop to think, well, wait a second. I don't really care that they're doing that thing because it doesn't really apply to what I'm trying to accomplish. Now, I'm not saying I don't want to keep track of it and I want to react to it if I feel like they're really encroaching into my sweet spot. But to just chase the competition, puts you back into that lack of understanding of why, puts you back into an individual feature that 34% aren't using, puts you into an 80-20 split of strategy versus tactics that don't come from an informed place.
Yeah, I've always been on the record to say, like, I will go and show my roadmap to the competition directly. Because their ability to then change course or out-execute or understand the user doesn't match what we have, right? And so Eric Ries talks about this a lot too, but it's everything that you were saying, because at the end of the day, like, it's about strategy, it's about alignment, it's about the why, and it's not about feature parity with your competition.
Right, yeah.
I would suggest that competitive intelligence is really, really important in sales enablement. It's like how you do battle in the field day to day.
Absolutely, yeah.
And much less important, in fact, potentially insidious when it informs product design and innovation.
Just really briefly, I think it's a little bit different, but we're talking about kind of following on features and incremental development, but then you look at the innovator's dilemma where you have to have a very close eye on competitors that may not even seem like competitors at first, and you have to read the book to understand that they need to be bought or redeveloped and moved over. So there's I don't know if it's a product manager's job to do that, or is it?
But I think what you're touching on is very important, right? Which is, if I'm a product manager and I'm trying to be strategic, I need to understand, like, what mode am I in? Am I just in the sustaining type of innovation where I am, focused on bugs and making the refinements and improving these things, and then all of a sudden there's a startup coming up that's more disruptive, that doesn't have to play by the same rules. So I think in that standpoint, we have to pay attention. We used to always say at a bigger company that says, pick a fight with the new guy. Yeah. Right? Because these new guys are saying, look, we don't have to play by the rules, and we can disrupt what you're doing because you're focused on sustaining. Yeah. Both are important, but they're very different.
So you're more like watching your back rather than.
Yeah. That's
seeing
right.
what's going on ahead
Yeah.
of you.
And,
But, yeah, go
and
ahead.
maybe also having some resource allocated to challenging conventional assumption. Like I think in the Clay Christensen book, he talks about creative disruption or creative destruction. So it's essentially out innovating yourself before your competition does, and constantly challenging existing assumptions around your business. Not to the point where you're like thrashing, but you have to have some resource allocated to continuing to pound on your value proposition and think about it differently.
That's great. Any more thoughts on that? I think this is a really good one. Now let's switch gears a little bit. One of the survey questions that we had recently on product craft and a good discussion, good debate, was the importance of a technical background versus a non-technical background. We found that most of the people have business background, business acumen, and so they're coming less technical into the game. And so what is the panel's thoughts on technical versus non-technical?
Well, yeah, I have trouble with the question because it's not a black and white question, so it's very, very gray. So
That's this guy's fault.
yeah, so yeah, terrible question.
Thanks.
I don't know why we posed it in the first place.
Yeah.
Because
So maybe we just say,
Yeah.
do you have any other questions?
yeah,
No.
well, like how many here who do not have, and don't have to raise your hands, but how many here without technical background are doing perfectly fine in their jobs? Great. But in my experience, I would never have hired a product manager that did not have a sophisticated technical background for the project that I was working on. So it really depends on the circumstances.
Yeah, and circumstances being role or project or the specific
Role or
thing.
project, but then I actually will say that I still maintain that they have to be technical enough to at least be able to have a basic understanding of coding, to be able to get into a database, to run queries, to be analytically minded.
But also, what I've found too in my experience is not just that, which is everything what you said, but it's also to be able to challenge and have good discussions with the engineers.
Yeah.
Right? So if you have no technical background, how do you have a debate
Yeah.
about something you know nothing about?
And you can jump in here, but we are going back and forth whether, hey, should you tell the engineers what to do and then they do it and they can give it back?
Yeah.
Or obviously it's more nuanced and you need a better discussion there.
So I'm a little philosophically
Yeah.
On the other side of the fence
Good.
of this conversation.
Meaning you disagree? That's okay.
This is where the cage fight part comes in. Not to be wishy-washy about it, but I think it does depend. So what I have found in working with lots of companies is engineering-driven companies tend to lean towards technical resources in a product manager role. And I'm okay with that if we also don't lose that critical eye on who's leading the business. Because to me, there's a business that needs to be run and there's technical stuff that needs to happen to build our products. I actually don't want my product managers to, they can come from a place where they knew how to code. I don't need them to have that as a skill set to jump deep into engineering. Because my concern is the deeper they find themselves in that technical conversation, the less they find themselves out addressing all of the other things that we've been talking about, strategy, and making sure that the why is the greater why, et cetera, et cetera. So the question I really have is, well, how are you spending your time and what's the trade-off to the organization? Because if we're expecting our product managers to be deep in a technical resource sense, then they simply don't have the time to also be running a business. And so I don't necessarily care who does what, as long as we have a critical understanding that all the work needs to be done and we've resourced it correctly. It's not dissimilar. Where's Mike Profit? Is he in the room? No? So I just sat in a session with Mike Profit, for some of you who just sat in that breakout session, in that product manager versus product owner kind of conundrum, right? Of two distinct roles, two distinct people kind of thing. And so to me, if I have a technical product manager complemented by a business product manager, a strategic product manager, I'm okay. I don't want to have one at the expense of the other. And I don't necessarily need my product manager to be technical.
Well, it is interesting, though, because if your business is in the business of building software, to be a good business person, you would need technical acumen, right? Is that fair to say?
I'm not saying you are devoid of technical
Yeah.
acumen. I don't want you to necessarily have to be somebody who has coded.
I absolutely disagree with you because it's not even a software product manager should be technically ability to code. I think marketing manager should be able to code these days. To do anything quickly and to get something out in front of a customer very quickly, it requires some amount of ability to get in and understand at least, a loop and how to get something on a website, basically.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
What was the question again?
I decided.
Like, if there was a fight and like,
No, I actually.
I mean, I see your
point.
no, but I mean, I think that's the value, because what's happening in people's minds out here is the debate, right? And saying, no, he's right and she's wrong, and she's right and he's wrong. And I think the reality, is that it's different for different roles. I mean, I again have said, if we're in the business of building software, we need to be able to have technical acumen. And what I've actually found is, if you go out and do little coding projects on the side, you actually develop some empathy with engineers about how complex or challenging it can be. So I see a lot of merit in both, but at the same time, let's be really clear about what the job is, right? I can't be focused coding if I really need to be strategic and working with my customers, et cetera, et cetera.
I just want to add 2 quick things to this, then I'll shut up. The first is that.
Well, you're on a panel, so you don't have to shut up.
I don't have to shut up.
You pontificate, man.
Okay.
Yeah.
So on the product craft community, we had a debate about this question, and Sam Boonin from Zendesk I thought he had a really smart answer to this. He said, of course it depends, and technical background is most important for companies that have a highly technical product being sold to a highly technical end user. That made a lot of sense to me. The other thing I'd add is that, and I'm not painting this with broad strokes, it really does depend on the individual and the circumstance, and the reality is you need kind of the human factor background, the ability to empathize with the user, and the ability to understand the enabling technology. But if you are excessively technical, is there the chance that you could sort of end game the whole story? Like you've already preemptively defined the product solution match before you've really done justice to the discovery process.
Yeah, I think what's important, to me, there isn't a right or a wrong here.
Can we get a couple beers up here?
Listen, who's doing what? And are you resourcing it correctly, and at what trade-off? So that's really the question. Yeah. And if you don't have all the bases covered and you're doing one or the other, then just understand the trade-off. And the trade-offs come in the form of things like what you just articulated, Jake. We can always risk building products that look like they were built by and for engineers versus the customer, because maybe we're not out listening to the customer. I'm not saying that's the case. I'm just saying both things have to be done. And so we just have to think about how we're resourcing it and make sure that we cover all of our bases. And if we don't, there's going to be a trade-off.
Cool. So let's talk a little bit about Net Promoter Score, which is another, I think, kind of great topic to debate a little bit. So one of the things that we found interesting in the study is that 10% of product managers, their companies, give them bonuses based on an NPS score. So true ownership, so much so that it ties financially to an individual or to a team. And so let's talk about that. Like, is that the right thing to do? It is a small but growing trend. Should product managers, product teams be responsible for NPS? And could we ever use this as a key indicator, like a key performance indicator or a leading indicator? Because NPS is a bit of a lagging indicator. So anything that we could do to maybe improve the metric as well?
At first I was like, well, that's great, because of all the people who should be focused on customer success, other than the people who are customer success people, but the people who are wanting to make customers happy are the product managers. So the level of which the customer is happy, we should be rewarded for that. But it doesn't make sense at all, because it will limit a lot of things. It will limit the desire for the product manager to push the boat out a little bit and to risk upsetting the customer, which has to be something that you do. Yeah. I think I know there was a couple more. I can't recall.
What about just to kind of build on? But so let's say forget about the bonus structure, which could be interesting. Yeah. You say it's not a good idea. I agree with that. But who should own it? Like who should be reporting out on it?
The Net Promoter Score is a company-wide trend. It's not, hey, we got 30 this year. It doesn't mean anything. It's a trend that allows a company to understand where they are compared to the year previous or where they're going to be next year. And it has to be tied to plans. It's to we expect to be there, or we expect to take a cut on this because we're making extra risks next year. So I think it's just a company-wide discussion led by the C-suite, and it's not strong enough an experiment or a measure, I think, to play with salaries with.
Yeah.
By itself.
So I don't know if I'd go so far as to say that PM should be compensated on the basis of NPS score, but I think it is a really important metric for product managers. I agree it's a company-wide metric, but you want to collect customer sentiment at various touch points along the customer journey, and many of those touch points are going to be part of the product experience, so it makes sense to understand NPS at these various touch points, but it's insufficient to just collect NPS without collecting more context, either through behavioral analytics or through verbatims, to understand the why behind that sentiment. Otherwise, it's just too opaque to be actionable.
I think what's important to keep in mind is it's a referential validation. So that in and of itself is important. However, it is an indicator. And I personally, it makes my skin crawl to think that we would compensate somebody based on an NPS score in a product role, simply because, and we had this conversation, not everybody responds to an NPS. And so when you think of a bell curve, right, the people who are most likely to reply to an NPS survey are going to be the people who really love what you're doing and the people who really hate what you're doing. And so you've got a small slice of a voice that's being heard. And so I find that to be, I think it's unsavory, honestly, to say there's a teeny voice of the people on the tail ends of the bell curve, and based on that, we're going to pay you. And I would hate that, me personally. I would hate that. And I think your point is really well taken. It's got to be longitudinal, right? And how do we push the envelope without risking our NPS score? And so as soon as you tie that to somebody's compensation, you're going to start to create all sorts of unnatural behaviors that put you back into all the other places we've already been in today's discussion. So I like it as an indicator. We should use it as an indicator, but we should use it as it was intended, versus this kind of swath that we say solves all the world's problems.
Yeah, I think we ask too much of NPS
I
score.
agree.
I feel like it's a really important metric, but it alone is sort of insufficient. It's part of a constellation of metrics that you want to track to understand customer health.
Yeah, for sure.
I think it exposes a frustration that many of us will experience, especially if you're in a more complicated enterprise environment where there's a lot of horizontal partners, where you're entrusted with keeping the customer happy and building what they want, but there's so many other things involved in delivering that product to your customer, whether it's the salesperson or the delivery man or and anything along the supply chain. And so the NPS will reflect all of that. And so it makes you wonder whether the product manager is as empowered as we're meant to be, or we think we are, when it comes to serving our customers the way we want to.
Yeah, got it. So if you, when you advise teams and they're saying, hey, how do I measure how do I know if what we're doing is adding value to our customers, if we're improving? And of course we have NPS and we're going to watch that trend, but where do you advise teams to, what do you advise them to measure?
I think the ultimate form of validation is if somebody's willing to give up something in order to acquire the thing that you're producing. Be that money, be that their data, right? So we all give up our identity to the likes of Facebook and Google, et cetera, because we get something in return for that. To me, that is the ultimate form of validation. If you use the term pocketbook as a generic term for giving something up in order to get something, to me, that is the ultimate indicator. Yeah. Will somebody give up something in order to get the thing that I'm producing because it resonates so deeply with them that they have to have it?
So
right?
some
It's-
form of currency.
That is, some form of currency is the ultimate validation that you're doing the things that people want and resonate with them.
I totally agree with that. The only challenge that's a bit of a lagging indicator,
Sure.
right? It's an outcome
Yeah.
measure, so
Sure.
it needs to be combined with also leading indicators that
Yeah.
give you sort of early visibility into what the health of what you're doing.
100%, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much to add because, as you said, if it's revenues, but if it's the company is intent on user acquisition as opposed to revenues, you have to play that in. But I suppose it should then just tie into the overall KPIs that the company has laid down. It's like we want to make money, we want to acquire users. So I think it should be tied, like you said, into actual job changes. I think that's a really smart way of looking at it.
So one of the other things that showed up in the study was that as the product manager role is evolving and is becoming more clear, we still see product managers carry a lot of jobs, right? And a lot of that comes from, I can speak for myself, which is I feel like I own everything, right? I kind of take that responsibility. So I care about what client success does, what marketing does, et cetera. But are we asking too much of product management in terms of ownership and what they're responsible for? And how do we steer that?
I don't think we are.
Yeah.
I think I heard someone describe it last night as a full stack product manager. It's owning outcomes, owning the continuous delivery of value to end users and customers, and that requires a very broad portfolio. That's not to say that you are responsible for all those functions, but you're going to get into the business of a lot of other functions that are traditionally outside of the scope of product management to ensure that you're delivering continuous value.
You know, I one of the questions I like to ask people when I interview them for a product role is, what do you think the primary function of a product manager's job is? And I have a very specific answer that I'm hoping somebody's going to give me. So if you ever interview for me, here it is. I'm giving you the answer. And the answer is this. I think you should wake up every day and you should ask yourself, how do I shift the demand curve to the right? And what is all of the componentry to make that happen, right? If you want to go back to the traditional marketing mix of how do I price my product, how do I promote it, what functionality do I build, what are my routes to market, all of those things should be done in the spirit of shifting that demand curve to the right. Now, I might not personally perform each and every one of those activities, but it's incumbent upon me as the leader of my product to ensure all of those moving pieces are coming together to shift that product to the right. And so if we're willing to support staffing getting all that work done, then we should be able to do that very thing. And then I don't think we're asking too much.
Kirsten, I should add, if you ever wake up in the morning asking yourself that question,
Whether or not I
you
should shift the
you
demand
should just
curve
probably
to
get
the
your
right.
head checked first, and then valid point. But
What should I do
Yeah, it's
today?
more- it's
Shift
more
the
like-
demand curve to the right.
Yeah, it's more like maybe on the drive into work.
yeah,
you
just
start
yeah.
thinking
I work from home, so it
not
might be like
first thing.
shuffling down
Yeah,
the hall
maybe in
in
the
my
shower.
PJs
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
So
great point.
I would note it feels a little contrary to what we were just talking about with NPS. So if I say, hey, product team should own NPS, and you're going, no, it's got too many variables, there's too many things that can affect it. But then we also are all agreeing that product management should own more, and if we want to move the demand curve to the right, if we see a problem here in this part of the experience, we should go get it. Why then should we not own product or NPS?
I don't think we said that, did we? I mean, product managers it's an important...
It shouldn't be compensated, but it shouldn't be just,
Right.
it's a company thing.
Exactly.
And I'm saying it's a product management owned.
Yeah, so I think product management has a hand in NPS and understanding customer sentiment in the product, specifically to understand what is and isn't creating value and delight for end users, and because that informs better decisions around product enhancements and prioritization and better understanding what's moving the needle for your customer.
Got it.
But
Yeah.
that's not to say that they own it company-wide. It's way too, I mean, there are a lot of factors that contribute to a high or low NPS score based on the broader customer experience, which is far broader than the product itself.
That's
But,
right.
Yeah.
And I've talked to client success organizations and individuals who own NPS, who they report out on. They said the frustrating thing about it is we're not the ones who get to decide what to build or what to fix. So we come up with all these things, but at the end of the day, it's the product team. The product team is the one quarterbacking it, so therefore it makes sense that they own it. So.
From your perspective,
Yeah.
should it be what are the guardrails? where do you not want product management to go?
Well, I think, at the end of the day, I want a product manager to understand the end-to-end experience of the user experience, the customer journey. It doesn't mean I don't want them to actually go spend time actually executing against that, because then we can't deliver amazing products. But I do want that acknowledgement. I do want the understanding so that they can talk about it and reference that and bring that up and have conversations. I think, seeing in an organization somebody being really passionate and advocating on behalf of the customer can have a lot of great impact. So. Now, one of the other things that we saw in the study is that product managers said, I would be more effective at my job if I had more training and better tools, which is, we see that a lot when you're asked, like, how can you improve? So if you take a step back, and today, again, we talked a lot about this idea of a product cloud and a product stack. So what's missing in that product stack today? What is that tool you wish you had?
Besides from the training, because we all need more training, but I was very surprised to hear that people thought there was a lack of products in the product stack. You see the board over there. And these are all products that make it more convenient for us to be product managers. We can still do those mechanisms without those products. We can use spreadsheets, and we interviewed a bunch of people, one from Square, Rohini Pandey, who told us all about how Square does everything on spreadsheets. It's all very manual. And so I think waiting around for the perfect tool is not a great excuse for a product manager. And there's plenty out there for, Pendo, there's a perfect product for every little thing, even for tooltips along a product. If you haven't found one, let somebody know and they'll build it and build a $150 million company in 4 years, or something like that.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on that?
One thing that I would love to see us adopt as a tool is free and analog. And that is, I would love if as an industry we would just give product leaders a little bit of time to sit and think. Like,
I'm a big fan of the one clap, so thank you for that.
We're running so hard, we're running so fast, it's about pushing product out the door, it's about next. And when you're so deep in that, it's really hard to get up and think about being strategic and looking out and looking around. And that's where you start to miss things, right? Those disruptive innovation things. And I think there's just and that's an American phenomenon. We'll let you weigh in cross-culturally here. That run hard, run fast constantly, or somehow your worth is not justifiable within an organization. And I would love to walk by my product leader's office 5-10% of the time in their week and just see them sitting at their desk thinking, or reading a book that has nothing to do with their job that might be tangential and helping them creatively dislodge something.
Yeah.
I recently read an article about why do you think of all the great ideas when you're taking a shower, right? And it goes through the physiological reasons for why that occurs. You're relaxed. You're going through a routine operation, so the cognitive load on your brain has been reduced. And that's why when you reduce all those things, these ideas pop in that they wouldn't have had when you're running 100 miles an hour. So I think one tool I would like to see us try to figure out how to embrace and institutionalize in our roles is allocating product leaders time to actually just kind of sit and think a little bit.
And yet we're all moving to open floor spaces or plans, right?
Right, which makes it even harder.
Yes, we have Google to thank for that, who ruined the workspace. But
right.
That's a whole other topic.
One of the things that came up in the State of Product Leadership Survey is the fact that some very, very small percentage of product leaders say that they're actively doing experiments or doing things like ethnography, like actually observing users out in the wild. And they're relying on abstracted measures of customer insights. So they're looking at things like surveys, and we all know, the flaws in surveys. Or they're looking at even more abstracted measures like NPS score. When I think that the real insight, the real learning comes from testing, iterating, and actually observing, like closely observing customers out in the wild in their natural habitat, and not asking questions so much as watching their behavior, because people don't necessarily they're not consistent with themselves in terms of what they say versus what they do.
Yeah, I mean, and you start to hear the phrase more and more of "get out of the building," right? Which is this idea of like, yeah, maybe stop looking at all the tools and all the spreadsheets and actually get out and observe and feel their pain and do more of that. So another question that I found interesting is that a lot of the respondents reported a strong alignment, or more of a stronger alignment with their marketing teams, and surprisingly a weak alignment with the engineering teams. And for me, I'm like, I mean, you just need both 100%. And so what's happening here? Why do you think this is?
It's such a loaded question.
Yeah.
I think, unfortunately, sometimes in our industry, we've created a contentious relationship between product and engineering, when we should really be just locked partners. And it's a byproduct for all the things that we've been talking about today, right? It's a byproduct for asking them to do work that people never adopt, that we shouldn't have done in the first place, which can be defeating for an engineer.
Sure.
It's having them tell me that I have to prove to them what we should be building, that I'm asking them to build because it's not something they want to build. And so, and that all happens for a lot of different reasons, right? Because we haven't really necessarily set up the construct for having that healthy iterative exchange with our engineering team. And so sometimes a byproduct of that can be we just kind of go to our separate corners and shy away. And so it's not actually totally surprising to me that we would find more of a kinship in a part of the organization where that natural tension isn't necessarily set up as such, and we haven't really fostered that relationship as well as we could have.
Yeah, a part of the tension between engineering and product management is probably healthy because it's forcing hard conversations and hopefully leading to better outcomes. But I think that sometimes we take it a little too far. I've seen product managers that become rigid in their thinking, and they have such strong conviction around a decision. And ultimately, it might be the right decision, but they pay the price in terms of the relationship. I mean, remember, these are human beings. And sometimes it makes sense in any negotiation to make a strategic concession for the greater good of the relationship.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The old product manager was embedded in engineering. It's part of the product development process. And I think that's one of the things that really sets aside the modern product manager from the product manager of old. And so these days, it's very rare that you'll have the engineering team hire the product manager. It's coming from a different place. It's coming from marketing, and you'll see in that survey that 46% of people reported to a CMO, as opposed to 7% to a CPO, something like that. So it's coming from a different angle. It's coming from business. It's coming from marketing, and so I think there's just going to be inherent distrust there, because the role has been extracted from engineering and the power has been taken somewhat from them.
And yet it's so important that, of course, I totally agree, there is a healthy debate, right? But at the same time, there needs to be an incredible amount of collaboration, right? We spend a lot of time thinking about the why and the what. Engineers can really help us with the how and really own the how. So how do we foster that? How do we develop better relationships with our engineering partners?
I mean, as cliche as it sounds, we put our customers at the forefront, because it's not really a discussion about what I want or engineering wants or vice versa. It's about what we're doing to solve problems together to make our customers happy. And so if we take ourselves out of the conversation and we put the people who we're trying to delight at the forefront of the conversation, and we should find that our conversation should evolve very quickly to be very passionate about helping those people that we're trying to solve problems for, versus debating back and forth what I think and what they think. Yeah. And so if you can put that customer at the forefront of every discussion we do, the rest of the baggage that we bring to the conversation should fall away very quickly, because we should want to champion together very quickly to make that person happy.
So I totally agree with you. Just to challenge that a little bit, how do you reconcile that with the need to be visionary and how you innovate, like customers? I think Henry Ford said, actually I don't think he actually said this, but the idea of, if I asked customers what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Are we asking too much of customers and expecting them to be visionary when they're just not?
Yeah, I think so. And I think this is where when you talked about getting into the wild, is really critical. Because customers won't tell you stuff. You have to watch them do stuff as well. And by the way, I don't want to just watch my customers. I want to watch people who aren't my customers too, because they're going to be the source of really disruptive innovation as well. And so you have to do all of those data points in order to make sure you're not looking over one slice of that pie, really.
So maybe one kind of last question. Where do you guys see the industry of product management going? Like, what's the most exciting trend that you see that if you're a product manager or you're on a product team are really excited about?
Let me answer from like a more macro point of view, because I'm currently not employed as a product manager. We started this conference, industry, another plug, Cleveland, October.
It's a great conference. It's a really great
1,000
conference.
product people, industryconference.com. Anyway, so we started it 4 years ago, but we did because we didn't find many forums for product managers, and it kind of slowly morphed into this conversation about the importance of product management and the impact that the product management can have. And I started to think that this is the future of business. You know, this is a business conference. It's not a technology conference. Product management has become a huge force where a product-oriented company is going to be more successful than one that is not. And it's only a matter of a very small period of time before every huge company in the world has product at the very focus. And it's a question, and you probably have a better perspective on this, is like, how much does product take? You know, is it so core that it's the future of business? Or does it sit within marketing or engineering in a similar way? I suspect it actually might be bigger.
Yeah, we used to say, it's not always the best product that wins. I think that's no longer the case, because you can't hide behind a false brand promise. If your product isn't great, it's going to show up. The flaws are going to show through. So I think that, I totally agree. I think the companies that define and lead categories that sort of take the disproportionate share of the winnings from any category are the ones with the best products. So that's incredibly important. Also, the fact that product leadership now has a seat at the table. Like, only 7% report that product managers say they report to a CPO. That's because it's an immature role. But I think it's now the best reporting model is having product reporting to someone who has C-level responsibility that puts product at the center of every conversation that's happening in the organization.
Well, they have to. In order to be effective, they have to report to that level. And so if they're
Absolutely.
not, the company is not functioning correctly.
Exactly.
So it has to come around, and they have to realize or they die.
Right.
So I'll just say this. I have a rich history, means I'm old. I have a rich history in my entire career, technology product management, 25 years. And right now, to me, this is the most exciting time for this profession that I've seen in my entire career. And the reason that I get super excited about, there's a lot of curious things we do, but I get super excited about things that I'm seeing. I feel like if you think about technology, really it's not that old as an industry, right? And so when you think about that natural progression from building things that are technical to building things that are functional to building things that have an experience, we've arrived. We've arrived at that experience trajectory in the conversation. And as that has happened, product is cool. Product is cooler in a way it's never been in my entire career. Product leadership is really finally being recognized as the place where we can drive the future of our organizations. Now, the downside of that is it's still kind of in its infancy. We're still trying to figure out, like, what does it mean to have a product manager and a product owner? And, when does design fit in? And where should they report? And how do we, solve for that? We're still kind of feeling some of those growing pains. But this is the moment in time where I feel like we finally have arrived on the big stage. And you look at events like Industry that has gone from 0 to 1,000 attendees in a 4-year time period. I can tell you that didn't happen 10, 15 years ago. And there's a lot of movement going on in the industry right now. And so I think that the role of the product leader, the future is exceptionally bright. I think we've still got a little bit to figure out about what exactly that does mean. Yeah. But I'm super bullish, more bullish than I've ever been my whole career for this as a profession.
Yeah, and I really love the idea, and as we close, I really love the idea or the question, right, of is product management the future businessman, right? Because if software is eating the world and everything from banks to whatever, or to lawn care, I was talking to Scott's the other day, and they were saying they're putting a digital product in the grass so it can give you feedback on your phone about what to, when to do things. So software is eating the world, for sure.
And anybody moving into the software has to have the product management team in place in order to be successful.
And it's
100%.
because product management, we've all seen the diagram, it's that intersection of business, of the customer, and technology. And so I really like to kind of end on that, thinking about, because I agree, we are starting to see things, whether it's, conferences or whether it's, you're starting to see it in academia where you have master's programs or undergraduate degrees in product management, which for somebody like, us that's been in product management for a while, it's really neat to see. We just hope that they're educated and teaching them the right way on how to do it. But yeah, a lot of really good indicators, but I really like to think that it is, if software is eating the world, that product managers and product teams are the future business people of the world, and I don't see that ending anytime soon. So, great. Well, thank you to the panel. I think that was a great discussion, and appreciate your time, and turn it over to Todd.
Yeah, great. Thanks, everyone.